Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a good week. Can't believe it's almost the end of October already. My goodness, time is just flying by really quickly. I have mentioned that Atlantis had sent me a bunch of emails and a bunch of files before he went into the hospital. And yes, he is still in a coma. No, nothing new. No changes. But I want to thank him. And this is kind of difficult for me because I have his email and his, what he wrote out. But there's a lot to cover here, and there's so many rabbit holes. And this is about Watchtower's old history. In fact, the top of his email was the Watchtower Society leader, who was, but was not, but whose death stroke was healed and ascended out of the abyss. Miss him very much. And this is about Anton Koerber. He was hierarchy at Watchtower, and there's some interesting things that Atlantis found, and of course I went and did some digging, and I just happened to have the JW's book, Faith on the March, by A.H. Macmillan. Now, Macmillan was one of Watchtower's lawyers back in like Rutherford's day, and I think he was even associated with the original Bible students when C.T. Russell and of course the foreword was by President Nathan Knorr. So this guy had a lot of history. But I just happened to find Anton Koerber in his book on page 167 under the subheading, "One Judge Renders a Decision." Now, back in Watchtower's history, they were under a lot of fire, for being conscientious objectors, for preaching. I mean, they were just under fire big time. Now, back then, they also had radio stations. They had WBBR, for example. And Rutherford used to blast his sermons, fiery sermons, over the radio waves. Well, a lot of the ministers in this country started giving them problems. And it even went as far to the FCC. Now, Atlantis also gave me the transcripts for the radio broadcasting hearings before the Committee on Merchant Marine, Radio, and Fisheries, House of Representatives, 73rd Congress, second session, on the H.R. 7986. And this was March 15th, 16th, 19th, and 20th, 1934. Now, this just also happens to be the same year for that little gem of a yearbook where Rutherford was basically saying that the Bible students, Jehovah's Witnesses, had the same mindset as Hitler and the Nazi regime. I know, it's a huge tangled web, and hopefully, I can keep this straight. But I'm just going to read, oh my goodness, there's, I think, like 5 or 6 pages here. The May 15th, 1968 Watchtower magazine contains the life story of a prominent Jehovah's Witness leader whose name is no longer remembered by current Jehovah's Witnesses. I had never heard of him before. This was a first for me. I happen to have that bound volume. The Watchtower Society leader was Anton Adam Koerber. However, some of today's witnesses may still recall the tale for which the Watchtower Society wishes Anton Koerber to be remembered. That tale was included in Koerber's 1968 Watchtower biography and was thereafter repeated time and again at Watchtower district conventions. I think I remember it, but they never mentioned him by name. They just said a prominent someone in Watchtower, and local Kingdom Hall meetings in the late 60s and early 70s. Incidents which I personally recall, including oohing and awing from the audience. As the tale goes, Anton Koerber claimed to have been offered a business proposition which allegedly would have yielded $1 million profit to him in only 1 year. But Koerber declined the business deal because it would have interfered with his ministry as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, it is in his life story. I found it on page 315. And same thing. 314. Second column. For years, Anton had been in the insurance business. While such issues as buying war bonds, a witness buying war bonds. Yeah, we actually did a video. They used to sell war bonds and stocks, Liberty bonds, back in Russell's day. Yeah. While such issues as buying war bonds caused strained relations with his business associates, and it was the slogan, "Millions now living will never die," which the Bible students were then preaching. Surprised they admitted it. But see, they can't edit the old hard copies. And caused him to sever his connections with the insurance business and enter the real estate field. So here we go with another real estate expert. Okay? Real estate. He's not a lawyer. Remember that for future reference when talking about this. In fact, in Macmillan's book, he talks about Anton Koerber going to different areas and representing Jehovah's Witnesses in court cases. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a real estate guy. There, his natural abilities enabled him to become highly successful. Buying, selling, building, financing, and managing houses, hotels, apartments, and office buildings. And he had moved to Washington, D.C. Now this was, I thought, interesting. 3 years later, he married and moved to Washington, D.C., where a son and daughter were born to him during World War I. He was arrested and tried because of conscientious objection to war, but the case was held in abeyance. I'm surprised Watchtower didn't, say exonerated, but abeyance, and dropped when the war was over. He now saw his way clear to enter the full-time preaching work. This he did with William N. Hall, a retired Army Brigadier General, whose privilege it had been to accompany Pastor Russell, the first president of the Watchtower Society, on one of his world tours. And of course it mentions that he was one of the anointed. Okay, so I'm going on with Atlantis' file here. Okay, so he had a business proposition that would have yielded $1 million profit. And I remember hearing that experience in only 1 year. But Koerber declined the business deal because it would have interfered with his ministry as a Jehovah's Witness. Even if somewhat close to the truth, that experience, as later repeated at 60s and 70s Watchtower functions, rarely ever included Koerber's name and never ever included Koerber's personal circumstances, which were that Koerber was an aging man in failing health who was already a multi-millionaire who did not need the money. Now, I did notice that right at the first paragraph, this is his life story. Happiness results from making the most of one's talents. Well, it's not just the preaching work. Right in the first paragraph. It was late in the summer of 1967, and the occasion was a convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. The location was the Laurel, Maryland racetrack high up in the stands. When a white-haired elderly gentleman in a wheelchair, surrounded by a handful of friends, turned out he didn't have much longer to live. But at the end of third paragraph, it says, at the same time he was blessed with no mean share of the world's goods, of which he made generous use. So that's translated, he was a multi-millionaire. Okay, back to Atlantis' email. Those readers who are personally acquainted with a highly successful life insurance salesperson or some other type salesperson who has what it takes to sell swimming and sunbathing accessories to Eskimos already have a good feel for who was Anton Koerber. The Watchtower biography discreetly describes Anton Koerber as a person with a very positive personality, which sometimes led to misunderstandings. With those whom Koerber interacted, amusingly, in a 1950s newspaper article promoting an upcoming Watchtower circuit assembly, the circuit servant for that area, Anton Koerber, obviously served as that reporter's primary source of info, given that the reporter referred to Koerber as the supervisor of the circuit, who has arranged for a number of visiting ministers who have taken personal training under his direction to assist him in the speaking and dramatic portions of the program. Anton Koerber's Watchtower biography includes some very interesting snippets from Koerber's life, but typically it initially leaves out most of the negatives. The Watchtower biography also leaves out several specifics about Koerber's life that sets Koerber uniquely apart from every other Jehovah's Witness. Let's see if we can help out the Watchtower Society with telling the rest of the story. Man, I miss this guy. United States versus Koerber. Anton Koerber's Watchtower biography states during World War I he was arrested, and I just read that from the Watchtower. I'm surprised that Watchtower biography did not claim that Koerber was totally exonerated, like I said, which is a claim that the Watchtower Society makes when it mentions that the cases against its corporate officers were essentially dropped when the World War I was over. Regardless, I do not have any additional specific details about Koerber's criminal prosecution in 1918 to 1919. Interestingly, however, the Watchtower biography claims for years Anton had been in the insurance business. While such issues as buying war bonds, like I read, to enter the real estate field. Yes, Anton Koerber started his rise to prosperity as an insurance salesman, but come on now. Would not Koerber's Washington, D.C. insurance business associates, in actuality probably Koerber's employer, had been more upset about the damage to their business reputation in the Washington, D.C. area caused by Koerber's arrest and criminal prosecution for draft evasion? He's hit that right on the nose, because I think, what secular organization wants one of their employees to be arrested and charged for draft evasion or something like that, especially back when patriotism was so high during the world wars? I get it. The Watchtower biography really does an excellent job of spinning what next happens in Koerber's life. Okay, I read this. He now saw his way cleared into the first full-time preaching work. Retired Army Brigadier General whose privilege it had been to accompany Pastor Russell. Anton found Hall a helpful companion and a fine soldier of Jesus Christ. And I didn't read that, but that is in the life story. They traveled far and wide in Maryland, Virginia, and other eastern states, leaving much literature in the homes of the people and set up Bible study groups. They would later return to strengthen them in the faith and train them in the Christian ministry. Eventually, a number of these groups became established congregations. So in these respects, they were serving much as did the Apostle Paul and his companions. Okay, that's a quote from the article. Now, Atlantis' comments. In actuality, General William P. Hall, whom Anton Koerber found helpful and who had been privileged to have accompanied C.T. Russell on the 1911 to 1912 Around the World tour, had been the Adjutant General of the United States Army at the time of his retirement. General Hall was a West Point graduate and recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor due to his heroics on the American Western frontier, and Hall is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Like I said, these spider webs are just everywhere. In reality, the few American newspapers which covered the Watchtower World Tour did so not because of C.T. Russell, but because of General William P. Hall. Koerber's Watchtower biography makes it sound as if Koerber was General Hall's peer, which in fact Koerber was privileged to have worked with a man of Hall's stature. Curiously, the Watchtower Society has never published a biography of General Hall, despite all that General Hall's own work did for his reputation in its early days. Then he has click here to read my own lame attempt at such. The Watchtower biography relates he had a share back in 1925 in fighting for licenses for radio stations owned by the Watchtower Society. For some 25 years and more, he appeared before presidents, cabinet members, and members of Congress to serve them with many resolutions adopted by Jehovah's Witnesses at their various assemblies. How do you suppose that Anton Koerber, a young relative unknown in Washington power circles, was able to reach the point where he was able to freely mix in such Washington circles? Yeah. Inquiring minds. In all likelihood, it was General William P. Hall who first introduced Anton Koerber to the circles of the Washington elite. It likely were those same William P. Hall contacts which enabled Anton Koerber's Washington, D.C. real estate investment business to flourish. At some point, probably in the early 1930s, Anton Koerber, Rose Koerber, along with their son and daughter, were invited to work at Watchtower Society's headquarters in Brooklyn. This is special given that only the most privileged of even the elite within Jehovah's Witnesses were allowed to bring their families to live at Bethel. In 1933, while his family remained at Bethel, Koerber was appointed to a field position as regional servant for the eastern United States. In 1935, Judge Rutherford sent Anton Koerber on a special mission to Germany and Russia. Koerber's mission was to regain possession of the Watchtower Society printing presses seized by the German government and to have the presses shipped to Russia, where Koerber was to open a branch office. However, Anton Koerber failed at each assigned task. And like I said, I've seen that here in his life story too. Sometime around 1938, Koerber's wife was struck by paralysis and became permanently bedridden. Whether it was because of this tragedy or some other event that happened even prior to 1938 is not known, but the family was forced to move back to the Washington, D.C. area. I have reasons to believe that the Koerbers did not return to the Washington, D.C. area until around this time, but I'm not positive. Given Koerber's failed mission to Europe, it is also possible that Rutherford and Koerber fell out after Koerber's return. However, given the info below, such may or may not have been the case. Additionally, sometime around 1934 to 1935, Anton Koerber began publishing a monthly newsletter called A Paper for Jehovah's Witnesses, which included both Watchtower-related local info and advertisements for some of Koerber's local business ventures. Judge Rutherford did not like such. Anton Koerber versus Joseph Rutherford and Matthew Arnold Howlet. For someone who knew Judge Rutherford as well as did Anton Koerber, it is extremely difficult to understand why Koerber would have ever committed the unforgivable sin of filing a personal lawsuit against Rutherford. Matthew Howlet and Judge Rutherford reportedly first met in 1913, possibly in Winnipeg, where Howlet was part of the local Watchtower crew. Howlet was made by Big Polly Rutherford in 1917, when as an unmarried man, Rutherford brought him from Canada to work at Watchtower headquarters in Brooklyn. In 1923, Matthew Howlet applied for and received a license to perform marriages in New Zealand. Matthew Howlet had been born and reared in England, where he reportedly completed 4 years of medical school. Howlet also claimed to have completed some additional postgraduate medical courses here in the United States. Curiously, however, Howlet testified in court that he had never ever practiced medicine. Yet Howlet further testified that he had served on and off as Judge Rutherford's private nurse and dietitian since 1934. Wonder if that is the guy that's in the photos with Rutherford at Beth Sarim. and that he had done so during the months leading up to Judge Rutherford's death. In fact, Matthew Howlet was accused of treating Bethelites with Albert Abrams' ER machine and techniques. And if you don't know what that was, it was the electronic radionics machine. We did a video about that years ago. You can look it up. It's another, rabbit trail that goes off. They were into these ERA machines. They were advertising all of these quackery medical treatments and stuff. It was crazy. It really was. In fact, we did a video years ago, but C.T. Russell was even selling miracle oil. Snake oil salesman. In fact, I think that was the name of our video. Like I said, so many spider webs going out. Which some claim to essentially be an electronic Ouija board. Yeah, it was weird. For additional information, see LECOCQ court case below. Despite one or more Bethelites stating that Howlet had treated them using Abrams' ER machine, Howlet not only denied doing so, but even denied that he knew anything about Abrams' ERA. It was in their literature, for crying out loud. Maybe that demonstrates how and why Howlet rose to the position of being one of Big Polly's most trusted captains by the latter 1930s. In July 1938, Rutherford sent Howlet to work as the zone servant for Northern Ohio, which was to become one of the hotbeds of legal action. If I remember right, Ohio was where they also started the issue of not preaching from door to door, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. You know that one that they always brag about? We took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won. Howlet and his by-then wife returned to Bethel in September 1939, just in time for Rutherford to send Howlet to Wisconsin, to Olin Moyle's home area, to deal with the limited rebellions that occurred there after Moyle returned, thereafter resigning his job at Bethel. And if I remember correctly in my history, Moyle and Rutherford actually went to court. Yeah, it was a mess back then, about like now. From these pieces of information about Howlet, it appears that Howlet was someone who had Rutherford's trust and confidence and was used by Rutherford for his most important missions. It also appears that Howlet's area of expertise was the medical field. Maybe Howlet, Rutherford, and Koerber were developing an improved version of Abrams' ERA? We will have to leave the Koerber lawsuit mystery for now, because there is even a bigger Koerber mystery, one that makes Anton Koerber one of the most unique Jehovah's Witnesses to have ever been a member of the Watchtower Society. This is when it gets interesting. Sometime around the filing of Koerber versus Rutherford, Anton Koerber was reportedly disfellowshipped or excommunicated from the Watchtower Society. If such did not occur until after the filing of Koerber's lawsuit against Rutherford, then that was certainly the actual reason, regardless what was given as the excuse. In the history of the Watchtower Society, there have been many big shots who have either chosen to leave on their own or have been forced to leave. You can do research, the facts for shareholders, the 4 directors that were supposed to take over the Watchtower Society for Russell after he passed away, but Rutherford basically did a hostile takeover. That is another huge rabbit hole. First president of the Watchtower Society chose to separate himself from the Watchtower Society. It wasn't Russell. We did a video on this. It was William H. Conley and Sarah Conley were 2 of the 5 original Bible students. William Conley was the first president of Watchtower, not Russell. A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses don't even know that. Like I said, another huge rabbit hole. Russell, his father, and his sister were the other 3. The first president of the Watchtower Society rejected C.T. Russell's own rejection of the Trinity doctrine, as well as Russell's repeated failed attempts to set specific dates for prophetic events. and returned to the Presbyterian Church, and thereafter helped found the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination. So that was the first president of Watchtower. He threw up his hands and went back to the other church. There have been many other similar defections from the Watchtower Society over its history. However, to the best of my recollection, none of those dozens of Watchtower big shots ever returned to the Watchtower Society to a similar position of power and authority, which they had held prior to their leaving the Watchtower Society. In fact, Hayden Covington is the only big shot that I can recall who has ever been reinstated, and Covington's was essentially a deathbed reinstatement. Interesting history. Sorry, there's gnats in here. This is where Anton Koerber breaks the mold and becomes the most unique Jehovah's Witness in the subsection of Watchtower Society history. Having not merely been disfellowshipped after working for years in positions of high authority, but having even committed the unforgivable sin of filing a lawsuit against the president of the Watchtower Society. And then after 12 or more years' absence from the organization, Anton Koerber was reinstated sometime in 1951-1952. After barely reestablishing himself as a congregation publisher, Koerber boldly applied to become a full-time pioneer sometime in 1952. However, Koerber's application was foreseeably rejected. Not want to take no for an answer, Koerber traveled to Watchtower Society headquarters, where he made another request directly to the service department. Bill Setnar. They are some well-known old generation XJWs. I believe her name was June, I think it was Joan, the Setnars. Bill Setnar was given the job of meeting with Koerber and telling him no again. Koerber gave Setnar a $10 handshake, that's 1952 money, which was a lot back then, and told Setnar that he wanted to speak with someone else, meaning someone who was someone at Bethel. C.T. Russell's and Judge Rutherford's old friend, A.H. McMillan, and I mentioned the book he wrote, went back with Setnar to speak with Koerber. McMillan reportedly dismissed Koerber with a severe tongue lashing, which included accusing Koerber of being selfish and simply seeking a title. It's interesting that at other times the Watchtower Society says that pioneer is not a title. Sounds like a noun to me. Bill Setnar reports that a day or two after his two meetings with Koerber that he entered the Bethel dining hall one day, and there sat Anton Koerber next to Nathan H. Knorr, the president of the Watchtower Society. After the meal, Setnar saw Koerber in the lobby. Koerber called Setnar over to him and pointed out the window to a parked brand new Cadillac. This is where it gets interesting. A little bit of history. Koerber called Setnar over to him and pointed out the window to a parked brand new Cadillac. Koerber bragged to Setnar that he had just presented the new Cadillac to President Knorr as a gift. Miraculously, instead of receiving an appointment as a regular pioneer in his congregation, Anton Koerber was appointed as a circuit servant. See? Grease the palms. A position that Koerber held for the next 7 years in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and only relinquished such around 1959 due to his failing health. To recount, Anton Koerber had been disfellowshipped for 12 years or more, but was appointed as circuit servant only a few months after being reinstated. But that is not the complete story. I love this. Years later, after Koerber had died in 1967, an official of the Dawn Bible Students, which was one of the groups that was formed after the schism that occurred after Judge Rutherford used legal inaccuracies and legal inadequacies in Charles T. Russell's will and estate to take over control of the Watchtower Society, despite the fact that Rutherford was Russell's attorney who had failed to correct those same legal problems. Remember I mentioned the 4 directors that were supposed to take over for Russell when he passed away. And then Rutherford used legal inaccuracies and legal inadequacies to get control of the estate and Watchtower. Another huge rabbit hole. So anyway, this official disclosed that in 1951, evidently prior to his trip to Watchtower headquarters, Anton Koerber had sent a letter to the Dawn Bible students in which Koerber requested a meeting with their governing body. That letter also included a donation of $2,000. Parentheses, again, that's 1951 dollars. During a subsequent meeting during the Dawn's annual convention, Anton Koerber allegedly offered his financial backing to the evil slave class. But yet he's reinstated and in good standing and even made a circuit servant? See? You have money, you can get anything you want in Watchtower. If they would make certain concessions, which presumably included appointing Koerber to some however you pronounce it, to some position of authority. Koerber's offer was eventually declined on the basis that they would not sell their principles for money. Well, at least the Dawn Bible students had ethics. Watchtower doesn't have any. Now it's interesting because when I did a search of Watchtower literature, I found several places where it mentions Anton Koerber. Here in this Watchtower, let's see, was this 1932? Washington Convention. All persons anticipating attending the convention, please write immediately to Anton Koerber, Chairman Convention Committee. And they have the address in Washington, D.C. It will be well for each company to handle this matter through their service director or secretary and thus avoid numerous letters. All mail regarding the convention is to be sent as noted above to Washington. Do not write to Brooklyn about this convention. Service appointments. Anton Koerber. I mean, there's just so much. Now, they even mention him in the Proclaimer's book. Proclaimer's book. Page 640, third paragraph. During the 1930s in the United States, a somewhat similar problem arose. A number of congregations were publishing their own monthly service instruction sheets. We would know them as Kingdom Ministries, your workbooks that they have today, which included reminders from the Society's bulletin, as well as experiences in their local schedule of service arrangements. One of these, published in Baltimore, Maryland, gave enthusiastic support to the preaching activity, but was also used to promote certain business ventures. And that's what Atlantis mentioned in his. That's what Koerber was doing. Initially, Brother Rutherford gave tacit approval to some of these, but when it was realized what could develop from involvement in such ventures, the Watchtower stated that the Society did not endorse them. This presented a severe personal test to Anton Koerber, for he had intended by these means to be of help to his brothers. In time, however, he again made full use of his abilities to further the preaching work being done by Jehovah's Witnesses. It only took him buku bucks, mega bucks. Now, I had mentioned earlier that Atlantis had also sent me the FCC transcripts from these hearings back in 1934. And it is 230 pages long, a lot to go through. But I did find on page 202 a mention of Koerber. Statement by Anton Koerber, Washington representative of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Did you catch that? Washington representative. Now, when you look up the definition of representative, it's someone that represents the organization. And it can also include lobbying. Lobbyist. See, represent the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. And there's pages and pages and pages of his testimony I mean, it seemed like it was a couple of days of testimony. Now I'm going to put the link down below to a file share or my Dropbox with this FCC transcript in it if you want to go through this yourself. But it's just interesting, representative of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. Now, sorry, I got a lot of papers here. On page 215, in this transcript, the Companies Act 1908 and 1913 Unlimited Company Memorandum and Articles of Association of International Bible Students Association, incorporated the 30th day of June 1914. Memorandum of Association. Skip down to letter C. To enter into any arrangement with any government or authority, supreme, municipal, local, or otherwise, and to obtain from any such government or authority all rights, concessions, or privileges that may seem conducive to the above objects or any of them. Thought we, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we weren't supposed to have anything to do with governments and being part of them. Just like today, we know Watchtower is still NGO members with the United Nations. When we mentioned that to the elders that showed up here when they, were starting their witch hunt against us, Cousin Richard, good elder, he says, well, of course, Watchtower needs to keep apprised of what's going on in the world. And we said, so that's why they have to be members, NGO members of the United Nations? Well, we know now that to file complaints and, they've been crying about the bans and the persecution and stuff that they're undergoing in several countries. Well, here, you have to be an NGO member to file these documents. All right, Atlantis goes on. On that transcript, right underneath what I read about the Companies Act, it has A.J. Greenop and Company, Bush Lane House, Cannon Street, London, E.C. And then Memorandum of Association. So Atlantis has the Memorandum of Association. The name of the association is International Bible Students Association. And then he has highlighted what I just read about to enter into any arrangement. Now, you will find this in the transcript on page 215. Like I mentioned, Atlantis says, any arrangement, any government, local or otherwise. This took place in 1934, the same year Rutherford published the 1934 yearbook. The same year Rutherford said that the Bible students were in full agreement with the principles of the Third Reich. So would Rutherford enter into any arrangement with any government, even if it was Hitler's government? Attached is the entire book of the transcript. There is so much more that you can look up. I found Koerber's name in many of the old literature. Unfortunately, jw.org, their library only goes back a certain time. And it's usually, it only goes back to after when Koerber was dead. So you have to, get one of the old indexes. And if you happen to have the Watchtower, the old Watchtower library CD-ROM, I did find a few things there. But as far as these old Watchtowers from the 20s and 30s, Atlantis had found those for me. And he had an index that was, oh man, it must have been from the 20s or 30s, somewhere in Bezilla. And if I can find it, I will add to the file with the FCC transcript. Because in that index, it goes back to the 1800s Watchtowers, and you can do searches, for some of this information too. So I'll look and see if I still have that. I know this was a long one, but as you can see, Atlantis, thank you, sweetie, so much. Miss you. He did a lot of research, and like I said, he was sending me all of these files, and very much appreciated to get this information out. So thank you, and you all have a wonderful week. Bye.